Jalen Hurts and concussion protocol, could it carry on to playoff week? All that and more coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in, our everydayers, to another edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, your only daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, giving you 5 episodes each and every week, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. I'm your host, Gino Cammilleri, thanking all of our everydayers for tuning in, making this your first listen or first watch of the day. Make sure you subscribe to the show so you don't miss a second as we wrap up the regular season, get ready for the playoffs, and hopefully get ready for a deep little run here from the Philadelphia Eagles. But on today's show, we are going to talk about Howie Roseman and the great job he did in 2024, getting this roster together to put them in a position for a successful 2024 regular season. We're going to look back before we look forward to see how good was 2024. But 2025 will not be great if quarterback one, Jalen Hurts, is not ready to go for the playoff game next week. But before we talk about that, this episode of LOE is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. All right, we got to talk about the elephant in the room. It's Friday, and usually when players go through concussion protocol and it gets closer to the end of the week, there is a chance that they potentially could get back healthy 7 days removed from the time that they suffered a concussion. It's rare. More than likely, though, you fall into the average case of Reed Blankenship, of Darius Slay, of Lane Johnson, and now of Jalen Hurts, where he suffered a concussion early in that game last week. He's out most of the game against Washington. Against Dallas, you don't see him. And you figure that he would probably be back and ready to go by the time that this Giants game would have had to happen. Well, let's just thank our lucky stars first that they wrapped everything up last week against the Dallas Cowboys in commanding fashion. Because if not, what happens if a 2022 scenario does have to happen yet again, and you were going to be without Jalen Hurts? Kenny Pickett is yet to practice as well. It's Tanner McKee and Ian Book. Well, luckily, they handled their business, and a blessing in disguise was this pseudo bye week that they now have, which will allow Jalen Hurts to continue to progress through concussion protocol into next week. Now, the concerning thing is that he suffers that concussion against Washington in the first quarter of the game, gives that funny little thumbs up to the referee, and he thought he was actually going to get back in the game. That hysterical looking back at it in hindsight. But they did a great job getting him off the field, taking precaution to make sure that every measure was taken care of, and that's what they're doing right now. This is not the Eagles' choice to hold him out of practice. This is an NFL thing. This is the concussion protocol, the 5-step protocol that Zach Berman did a really good job breaking it down on Twitter, what each of the 5 steps means in the protocol. One of them is getting back on the practice field, and Jalen Hurts, even without putting on the pads, I mean, not even doing stuff on the side where you're doing cardio work, and that's phase 3 of concussion protocol, he's not even back for that yet. Now, if you look back at what was going on with Lane Johnson when he suffered his concussion earlier on in the season, he had a chance to get back in that week time frame. He did practice, but he didn't have a full padded practice. Now, that's the thing that even if Jalen Hurts were to have been on the practice field, there's no way he could have gone if he didn't get that padded practice in. So, thank your lucky stars that this game isn't a Denver Broncos type of scenario where they have to play their starters into Week 18 against the Chiefs, who are going to rest most of their starters. What if you had to go into this game with a chance, and maybe a chance to not even get the 2 seed, let's say. Let's say this game had bigger implications, and you only had QB3. That would be tough to stomach. But we're going to talk about the regular season and how successful that was. A lot of it had to do with the depth and Howie Roseman doing a good job putting that all together. But it's not to win the NFC East. That wasn't the goal. The goal wasn't to win 13 games. The goal wasn't to get the 2 seed. The goal was to make a run well into the playoffs, well into the Super Bowl. Now, is it concerning that your quarterback, who suffered a concussion 2 weeks ago, has yet to practice, and you're about 9 days removed from a playoff game? Or until a playoff game, I think removed is after. Sorry about any of you English majors out there. It's a little bit of a concern. But at the same time, he has to go through protocol. There's nothing you can do. You can't rush him back. This is how it goes. And the reality is, he wasn't going to play this game anyway since they won last week. And that's the thing that, good on this Eagles team, unlike in the last season, in 2023, where every time they had a chance to win the division, to take what was theirs, to host a playoff game, they failed to do it. In 2022, it took all 18 weeks. 2024, part of the reason it's a successful regular season, in my opinion, and we'll talk about that in the next segment, is that you do get to rest your starters. And timing is a crazy thing, and you can't really make sense of it, but what if Hurts suffers that concussion last week against the Cowboys, let's say? He made it through Washington healthy, and he misses the playoff game in that 2-week window. That realistically could have been the case. Let's look back at last season when A.J. Brown is in this meaningless game and he gets dinged up, and all of a sudden you don't have him for the playoffs. That's tough. What are you going to do if you have Tanner McKee starting a playoff game? Go do it on Madden. Go do it on your career mode there. The Eagles aren't winning anything without that. And I think we saw that the last 2 weeks, especially in that Washington game. When Kenny Pickett was in that game, it was night and day. Night and day. You need quarterback one. Timing-wise, you lucked out. You lucked out because this 2-week window, if he suffered it last week, shucks. You're going to be without QB1 potentially against Washington again and or Green Bay. But, thank your lucky stars. That 2025 is out to a good start. And timing-wise, he will be back on the practice field next week. Fingers crossed, all things work out accordingly. And he should be ready for that playoff game. I wouldn't worry too much until we get into next week and Tuesday comes around and he's still not on the practice field. Okay, I might change my tone of about what I just said on this microphone. But, as I had said, once they clinched the NFC East against the Cowboys, they didn't get the 1 seed and get that bye week. They got this pseudo Week 18 bye week where, look at the Eagles injury report. A lot of those guys that, even though they were injured, that are starters, are not going to be in this game. They're taking every precaution to get into the playoffs fully healthy. And Jalen Hurts, part of that precaution, is going through the concussion protocol. Taking a little bit longer than we thought, but I would not panic. I believe he will be back next week in the playoffs when the regular season is all wrapped up. And we're going to take a look back at 2024. Was it or was it not a successful regular season? We're going to continue this discussion as we roll along on this Friday edition here of the Locked On Eagles podcast. This Friday edition of LOE is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of the final weeks of football action. The CFP is in the semifinal. The NFL is going to be in Super Bowl mode before you know it, and that's where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and you want a chance to win real money while watching the games, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. And you can make your picks in as little as 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or you want to cash out quickly, Prize Picks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it is clear that people are loving this platform. And if you're a sicko like me that's ready for this Week 18 game, for those Eagles backups to go crazy, and you want to say, is Kenny Gainwell going to have more than 1/2 of a touchdown? Is Grant Calcaterra going to have more than 1/2 of a touchdown? Let's say you want to go Tanner McKee, tush push more than a half rushing touchdown. Well, you could do all of that over at Prize Picks. And we have a special offer for you here at Locked On NFL and Locked On Eagles. Download the app today and use code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's Prize Picks. Run your game. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. This episode of LOE is also brought to you by our friends over at BetterHelp. What do you want your 2025 story to be? Every January brings a new chapter, 365 blank pages waiting for you to fill. If there's a part of your life you want to rewrite or a plot twist you've been craving, why wait? Life isn't about fleeting resolutions. It's about taking control and becoming the author of your own story. I cannot speak highly enough of therapy and everything else that BetterHelp has to offer. Think of therapy as your personal editor, helping you craft your life you deserve. It's not just for crisis situations. Therapy can help you develop healthier coping strategies, improve your relationships, and empower you to have the best version of yourself moving forward. Whether you're facing a challenge or just looking for personal growth, therapy is a powerful tool to help guide your journey. Whether it's learning how to set boundaries or tackling stress in new ways, therapy can help you develop skills for a better tomorrow. Even if you're never tired, therapy is there and the benefits are clear. Finding someone to talk to and gaining fresh perspectives can make all the difference in how you navigate life's ups and downs. Write your story with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon for 10% off your first month. All right, everyone, rolling along here on this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. And if you're new every day to the show, or if you've been listening for a long time and you have yet to subscribe and turn on your alerts, what are you waiting for? We got 5 shows each and every week. We'll have you plugged in all through the playoffs, and we got a ton of shows recapping the regular season, and this is the last regular season episode for you before we shift into playoff mode. And let's take a look back. And I was thinking, what do I want to talk about on this show today? And before we get into the playoffs, and I know everybody's already saying, let's look past the Giants. We got to figure out who we're going to play. Is it most likely going to be Green Bay? Is there a scenario we play Washington? Well, how did we get to this point before we get into playoff mode? The 2024 season started the moment that 2023 playoff game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers ended. The moment you saw Jeffrey Lurie's face when the broadcast cuts to him, the look of disgust, the look of, this isn't my Philadelphia Eagles. And I think if you go back and listen to Lou and I, we felt very similar. And I'm sure you, the everydayers, the fans, felt a lot alike. That team was too talented to only get to the first round and lay a freaking egg. Well, the moment that game ended, Howie Roseman, and we'll talk about the construction of this roster to finish up the show, he said, we need to get back closer to 2022, do a lot of the things that got us to that point in 2022, and get better in areas where maybe we were weak. And what was the result? Let's just go through a little bit of a resume and tell me if you believe that this season, 2024, the regular season, just the regular season, don't look at the playoffs yet, we'll judge that once that happens, was the regular season a success? Well, to start, you're 13-3 with a chance to win 14 games. 2 out of those 3 losses were by a single possession, with a chance to close them out if Saquon Barkley and Devonte Smith simply catch a football for a first down. Could potentially have 15 wins, but you still have a chance to win 14. Was that good enough to get the 1 seed? Well, it's a season where, statistically, this is the strongest group of NFC opponents in the playoffs for a good reason. The NFC North got 2 teams that are fighting for 15 wins in Detroit and Minnesota. Green Bay, who most likely you are going to face in the first round, is the strongest 7 seed ever in terms of, I believe, win record. I don't think there's ever been a double-digit winning team having that 7 seed. You got the 2. That's pretty successful. But getting the 2, you didn't get that bye week like we said. But as I said in the first segment, you were able to rest your starters in week 18. And when you had a week 5 bye, that's a win in and of itself. Looking at the offense, 6 most total touchdowns in the NFL with 52. They had 10 out of the 16 games so far scoring 25 or more points. They only had 3 games all season long where they failed to hit 300 yards of total offense. 1 game they were only 8 yards short. Jalen Hurts, his best season in terms of completion percentage. He only had 5 interceptions this year, his second lowest in terms of interception to the amount of attempts in his career. He had 3,500 all-purpose yards between passing and rushing, and this was only his 3rd highest rushing yards in his career. So you look at the statistical output, a lot of it came on his arm. 32 total touchdowns. Saquon Barkley, 2,000 rushing yards. We know that happened. 15 touchdowns. He's currently minus 10,000 to an Offensive Player of the Year over at FanDuel. AJ and Devonte went for 15 touchdowns combined, around 2,000 combined yards, and they look just as good as ever. Your O-line transitioned from Jason Kelce to Cam Jurgens, who just made the Pro Bowl. At right guard, Cam Jurgens moves over and in comes Mekhi Becton, a cast-off from the Jets, who is probably going to get a nice little payday after this season, who put together one of his best seasons at a position he never played. Jordan Mailata looked fantastic. Landon Dickerson made a Pro Bowl. Lane Johnson hasn't allowed a sack since the Vietnam War. Your offense looked really good and very successful. Now your defense. You have the 2nd and 6th in terms of favorites when it comes to Defensive Rookie of the Year over at FanDuel with Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. You hammered and nailed those first 2 picks. You also have, respectively, the 12th and the 20th highest favorites for Defensive Player of the Year over at FanDuel with Zach Bond and Jalen Carter. The defense had 3 games all year where they were allowed 25 or more points. Only one of them came after the bye week, and that was the Jaden Daniels nuclear game. And they had 10 games where they allowed 300 or less yards. Zach Bond and Nakobe Dean, 6.5 sacks, 275 plus tackles, 20 tackles for loss, 8 passes defended, 6 forced fumbles, probably an all-pro odd for Zach Bond, or Nakobe Dean, Zach Bond. Yeah, because you could probably give both of them an all-pro award at this current point in time, but you're going to get a contract extension for Zach Bond. Your secondary, we already mentioned the rookies. Darius Slay is having one of the best seasons he's ever had. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Reed Blankenship combined for 10 interceptions. Jalen Carter, Josh Sweat, and Nolan Smith combined for 19 sacks, 29 tackles for loss. Was it a successful regular season in 2024? Hell yeah, it was. Hell yeah, it was. Did Jalen have this crazy season where he was an MVP? No. Did both AJ and Devonte go for 1,000 yards each? No. Did the defense have a 2022 sack output? No, they did not. But the little areas where they needed to get better, allowing less points and less yards per game. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson coming back and creating 6 turnovers. Saquon Barkley being that explosive element that they needed in this offense. The offensive line transitioning from Hall of Fame, maybe once in a generation center, to Cam Jurgens in that unit, which is so good, and allowed Saquon to rush for 2,000 yards. The defense and Vic Fangio, a match made in heaven. Was it a successful 2024 regular season? Absolutely. Absolutely. And where did it start? Started last year, in that offseason, where Howie Roseman took it upon himself to change a lot of the things that did not go right for them in 2023 to set them up for a successful playoff run in 2024. Howie Roseman, this is where we give him his flowers for what has gone right in 2024. So come on back as we finish up this edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. This episode of LOE is also brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown. You know that we do LOE3 each and every week, except for this week because Lou is cruising along in the open seas. No picks this week, but you can have some fun over at FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, everyone, finishing up this week of Locked On Eagles shows. Lou will be back to recap this Sunday's edition of the Eagles closing out the regular season one last time in 2024. Lou and I will recap that post-game show, but for today, to finish up this edition of LOE, we have to talk about Howie Roseman. We just got done discussing, was 2024 in the regular season successful? At first glance, at an in-depth look, absolutely. Now, do we get here to this point if Howie Roseman does not make a conceited effort to change a lot of things that didn't go a little bit wrong, that went so extremely wrong, it sent this entire team in a tailspin? The lack of depth at linebacker. After a Super Bowl run where TJ Edwards and Kaiser White were pretty damn impressive. Both of them are gone. And what happens last year? Zach Cunningham is your best linebacker. Nakobe Dean is banged up. And in comes the zombie of Shaq Leonard. Nicholas Morrow did pretty good. Him and Zach Cunningham, they were okay. Okay being the key word. Howie Roseman realized what he needed to do. In comes Zach Bond. Arguably one of the best signings Howie Roseman has ever made in terms of value and output. For sure should be re-signed. Why? Because he allowed Nakobe Dean to be the player that Howie Roseman drafted him to be. Defensive line. This is one where not many things changed, but those seeds were planted years ago. The Nolan Smith. Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, all those guys. Those are all draftable players. All guys that were drafted outside of Bryce Huff. Every single player that you have on that D-line, Thomas Booker, he was a rotational guy, but hey, you still found him. He made his way onto the team through the preseason. Howie Roseman, realizing that they needed depth at that position. At all those positions on the D-line. Look at the Moro Ijomas. Look at the Jalix Hunts. Look at those acquisitions. The depth pieces on the D-line is what changed the entire outlook. Because now, the guys up top, Jalen Carter, Josh Sweat, Nolan Smith, those guys could dominate. And then when they do need to be rotated out, well, the depth is just as good. Where last year they didn't have it. They were getting ran all over. Everybody was just running over the Eagles at the end of the season last year. The run defense is phenomenal now. And since the defensive line and the linebackers look really good, well, look at the secondary. Look at how good it is. And how much changed in a single offseason because of Howie Roseman. It feels like each level from defensive line, he had a lot of the stars there, had to fill in some of the blanks, just a couple depth pieces. Linebacker, he had one guy in Nakobe Dean that he believed in. He just had to find one more piece. In the secondary, it was Slay, Reed Blankenship, and 5 or 6 other guys that were competing for jobs. And of those guys, in comes Quinyon Mitchell. In comes Cooper DeJean. Back comes Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Isaiah Rodgers, he was acquired last year, comes off of that suspension. These are all moves Howie Roseman made. From the littlest moves to the most gigantic move. Howie Roseman made a conceited effort, especially on defense, to make things better. And he had to do it in a big way on defense. Whereas offense, a lot of the pieces were there. You needed, I don't know if you really needed the Jahan Dotson move, but it happened. You acquired him and you drafted Will Shipley and you made some really good signings on the offensive line with the Mekhi Becton move, right? And Fred Johnson has been around and Tyler Steen, that selection. But the biggest win is Saquon Barkley. It's the willingness to change year to year. You don't get Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean if you don't change. From not drafting a first-round corner in 20 years, you had to change. At linebacker, you finally changed. You finally made a worthy investment, and hopefully they extend Zach Bond. On the defensive line, you finally let the young guys play, and look at what's happening. In terms of the offense, the first year you really paid a running back, played a damn good one. Howie Roseman is the reason this thing happened. Him and Nick Sirianni got on the same page, and they realized that they were definitely part of the finger pointing last year. But if they were going to have any success, it starts with them. Everything I talked about in the second part of this show, how good they've been scoring points, how few yards their defense allows. The execution comes because Howie Roseman executed in the offseason. And Nick Sirianni and his staff, now that they have all the pieces, they executed it to a T. This wasn't a question of 2023 where is the talent going to match up to the output? The talent is matched up to the output and then some. Now the goal is, looking forward, to go and hoist the Lombardi Trophy. And this 2024 team, thanks to what happened in 2023, and getting oh so close in 2022, if those guys in the building don't go through the adversity, this season doesn't happen. The success of 2024 does not happen. And hopefully this isn't the last of the success that we get to talk about. Hopefully we get to do many more of these shows talking about the Philadelphia Eagles, potentially 4 more games after the regular season ends. But that'll do it for us here in 2024 in the regular season. Thank you to all of our everydayers that listened, watched, interacted with us during the regular season. Thank you. Thank you. It's just Lou and I talking to each other here on our microphones. If you are not on the other end listening, but we're not going anywhere. We got the playoffs coming up. We're going to recap the game on Sunday, bring you 5 episodes next week. So make sure you subscribe to the show here. Make sure you tune in wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well for your first listen or watch of the day. For your second listen or watch of the day, make sure you check out the new Locked On NFL in the morning with the madman Tyler Rowland. I'm on the Monday show with him. And in the evening, the barber, Tony Wiggins. Sometimes I'm with Wig, but most of the time I'm with Ty. Go check them out as well. Make sure you subscribe, like everything Locked On, especially the Locked On Philadelphia shows as they continue along with their season. MLB will be back before we know it, but we'll be back here on Locked On Eagles Sunday night after the Eagles finish out the regular season. Thank you for tuning in this week, each and every day. I'm your host, Gino Cammilleri, wrapping it up as I always do. Fly, Eagles, fly.